Joseph Campbell. As of last May, Professor Campbell retired from his position on the Faculty of Literature at Sarah Lawrence College, where he'd been teaching for 38 years. While teaching there, he established himself as one of the leading and outstanding scholars in the field of the study of mythology. He published very widely, and his major publications include the full-volume Masks of God, Hero with a Thousand Faces, A Skeleton Key to Finnegan's Wake. He also edited two very important works, the papers from the Uranus Yearbooks, which are a collection of papers on the relationship of Jungian psychology to themes in philosophy and religion. And he also edited the works of Heinrich Zimmer, who is an outstanding scholar in the field of Indian thought. His most recent book has just been published a couple of months ago, and I think that's right, 2 months ago, and the first edition has already been sold out. It's entitled Myths to Live By. So we are very pleased to have Professor Campbell here to talk with us tonight. In the age of demythologizing and secularization, it will be good for us to hear Professor Campbell's arguments for the meaning and significance of myths in contemporary society. So tonight, again, we're fortunate to have Professor Campbell with us, and his lecture is entitled The Vitality of Myths. After the lecture, we'll have time for questions and answers for as long as you want to question Professor Campbell.
Thank you very much. When people ask me what do you do, and I say I study and write about mythology, they then say, oh yes, when I was a little boy or a little girl, I liked to read fairy tales, and I read Bullfinch's mythology, and I also have great interest in classical myths. Now, what would you suggest I buy for my little girl? And then I say, yes, the classical mythology is something that interests me very much. The person might also remember that Wagner used Germanic and Celtic motifs, and then the person would mention these. But then I would say also, yes, and I find the Garden of Eden an interesting mythological event. And Moses on the top of Mount Ararat coming down with those tables of the law, smashing them and going back for a second edition. And the virgin birth I find a very interesting motif. And then the person begins to back away and goes to get another cocktail. My definition of mythology, derived from these continuous experiences, is other people's religion. And my definition of religion is a misinterpretation of mythology. Now, specifically, the religious misinterpretation consists typically in imagining that the events which are characteristic of mythological contexts have some historical validity. This is the principal characteristic of the problem in our present religious situation. These symbolic forms, which derive from the human psyche and the human imagination and the human visionary powers, are interpreted as though they referred to possible historical events. And as we now know, they are impossible historical events, and so people's religious faith is somewhat disturbed. Such motifs as virgin birth, death and resurrection, birth in a cave, receiving messages from the deity on the top of a mountain, and all this. These occur throughout the world, everywhere. They are mythological archetypes. There's no doubt about it. You can find them everywhere. Their primary sense, therefore, cannot possibly be that they refer to a historical event somewhere. If a historical event receives these in legend as being the interpretation of what happened there, this is simply giving a local interpretation, a local definition to something that is common to the whole of the human species. And the problem, therefore, in studying mythology, in studying religions, is not to worry about whether these things had any historical factualization. The important thing is to try to understand what their relevance is to the interior of man's life. Why are they so important? Every civilization in the world, up to the very present, has grown from mythological motifs. The great mythology of the Middle Ages supported the whole culture of the Christian world. The myth of the fall in the Garden of Eden, the redemption at Calvary on the cross, and the carriage of the grace of that redemption to mankind through the vehicle of the sacraments. This is the great mythology on which the whole medieval social structure was founded. We have the mythology of the Jewish race, the fall, the continued sinfulness of man following the flood and the Tower of Babel, and God's establishment of a holy race that would carry his will to mankind through the ages and reestablish the world that God intended and so forth. Every culture in the world is founded on these systems, and obviously they have no historical possibility. And this is particularly apparent today when the sciences and scholarly research have shown the impossibility. Let's consider, for example, the ascension of Christ and the assumption of the Virgin. We know that even going at the speed of light, they wouldn't be out of the galaxy now. And where's the heaven that they were meant to go to? When this concept of heaven was introduced, it was supposed that just a little bit beyond the planet Saturn, and the planet Saturn wasn't supposed to be very far away, there were the heavens. Now, if we're going to save these symbols, we've got to interpret them as referring to psychological circumstance. To make it very vivid, let me take the problem of Christ. Make a distinction in your thinking between Christ and Jesus. Jesus was a historical character. He lived at a certain time in a certain place. Christ is the second person of the Blessed Trinity. This is an eternal principle, antecedent to history, and will be long after history, and is here and now and everywhere all the time. The essential principle of the Christian religion is that Jesus, the historical character, was the only unique manifestation in time and space of this eternal principle. He was truly God. Now, what is the sense of the second person of the Blessed Trinity? The second person of the Blessed Trinity is the Son who knows the Father. God, the Father, can be known only by God. To know a God, you must become a God. Therefore, for this object to be known by a subject, the subject must be God. And insofar as you and I come to know something of God, we are approaching that which is Jesus. And so he becomes the model for us. But the basic concept of the Christian tradition is that Jesus is the only man, because he was true man as well as true God, who actually was capable of knowing God in his perfection, because he was God. And then the Holy Ghost represents the relationship between these two, which is the relationship of love and ultimately consubstantiality. So here are mythological concepts which essentially have no relevance, to the accidents of history. And the characteristic of our history is, of our religion is, that it insists on our contemplation of the historical aspect. Now, this is a problem that's always troubled the mystics. There was a great German mystic named Angelus Silesius in the 16th and 17th centuries. And in a little verse, he declares, "Of what good, Gabriel, your message to Marie, unless you can now give the same message to me? So that I may say, as Paul said, I live now, not I, but Christ in me." Now, when the Christ principle comes to birth in you as the moving principle of your life, it is as though there had taken place a virgin birth. The sense of the virgin birth is the birth of the Savior in the world, the birth of the energy of the Savior in your soul. And to get this mixed up with a lot of biological problems as to whether a woman can conceive as a virgin is to mix up the whole reference. So this is the main situation that I see today, not only with the Christian religion, but with all of the great religions that come from a period of man's experience and consciousness that has been left behind, that these symbols have been discredited. But the unfortunate part about these symbols is, as I've tried to indicate already with the idea of Christ and the virgin birth and so forth, they refer to something that we must be in touch with within ourselves, potentialities of the spiritual life in ourselves, which is a deeper life and a richer life and a more sustaining and substantial life than the life of our normal relationship to the economics and politics of our daily existence. And to be put in touch directly, as by hotline, with those dimensions of our own character which are out of reach of our normal waking consciousness, we require some kind of message system. And this message system is the system of the archetypes of mythology, and they have served man in this way throughout history. Man lives not by bread alone, not by economics, not by political economy, but by the sense of aspiration. Man is an aspiring creature, and that aspiration is something that you will not find in dog and cats, but you will find economic and sexual concerns and political concerns among the dogs and cats. That is one aspect of our nature that is the physical vehicle aspect, but to be human, we must undergo the second birth, and that's the sense of all this. And with these systems removed for us by the collision of this rather archaic literalism of our traditions with the new findings of science and so forth, we are bereaved of our mythologies. Now, what I'm trying to do is, this was something that deeply concerned me as a young man, and I went to work to see how is it that these myth forms have been always common to mankind, and of what sense and relevance are they to us today, and what has happened to our world to transform it, and what must happen to our mythologies to bring them into relationship to our life. And that's what I want to try to talk about. A very interesting thing that has turned up, it's been known for a long, long time, is that this mythological imagery stems from vision, whether in the primitive level or in the level of the high literate cultures. The visionaries are those who speak forth these myths. And the myths then are incorporated in ritual enactments. And by participating in the rite, one participates in the myth and thus is put in touch with that aspect of one's own psyche, which is symbolized in the myth. Consequently, in your own dreams, in your own visions, you are approaching the realm of myth. But your dreams are of two main orders. One order is that of your very local personal problems. But when you have these more or less solved, you begin to move past the peculiarly personal problems into what might be called transpersonal problems, meeting with the great confrontations that human beings have been meeting all through the centuries, through the millenniums. The facing of the mystery of death, the facing of the mystery of birth, the facing of the mystery of the magnetism of men and women for each other, and the miracle of their being together. All of these are problems that mankind everywhere has met with. And then the miracle of the world of nature itself and its being. What is it? What moves and lives through all this? This is what the myths are trying to render to us, and do render to us if we can listen to them. Now, I thought the best thing for me to do would be first to speak in some detail about what I regard as the principal functions that mythology has served in traditional contexts, see what has happened to the field of those functions in our society today, and then discourse very briefly about the big general history of the development of mythological forms, and then look specifically at some of the things that have happened that transformed the field, which our religious traditions must take into account and must meet and spiritualize for us. Mythology, as I see it, serves four basic functions and always has, and they're very important functions. The first function is that of awakening and maintaining in the individual a sense of awe and gratitude before the mystery of existence itself. This is not easy. Consider that for millenniums life had been in being before eyes opened and saw what was going on out there. And when they opened, what they saw was life eating life. The first fact of life is it eats itself. The world is a sea of blood and ravenous jaws. And the sensitive mind has to be convinced of the wonder of this, to affirm it, and to partake in it. One of the first functions of the early ritual life was to bring a yay into man's seeing of this monstrous situation. There is a very interesting and stunning Indian legend, Hindu legend, that has to do with this. The great god Shiva, S-H-I-V-A, who is the Lord who generates the universe, has as consort the goddess Kali. Shiva and Kali, Shiva and his consort constitute the generating power of the world. Well, this story is of a monster who, through great yoga, achieved such power that he could overthrow, and did overthrow, all the secondary gods, the angels of this cosmos. And in his impudence, he went to Shiva and demanded Shiva's consort. Well, Shiva was, of course, indignant, and simply opened that third eye in the middle of his forehead, and puff, electric lightning bolt struck the ground. And when the smoke had cleared, there was a ravenous, thin monster there with the head of a lion and hair spreading to the four quarters, who was there to eat up that first monster. Now, when a thing like that happens, you've got to think fast. And this particular monster did the only intelligent thing there was left to him to do. He threw himself on Shiva's mercy. Now, there's a kind of theological game. If you throw yourself on the god's mercy, the god has to grant mercy. So Shiva granted mercy to the monster. Well, that left monster number two with nothing to eat, and his whole nature was hunger. So he said to Shiva, "So what do I eat?" Shiva, the god, no end of imagination. He had imagined the world, and here it was. And he said, "Eat yourself." So this monster starts to work on his feet. He comes chopping up, all the way up, right through his chest, till there's nothing left but a face. Shiva was simply ravished. He said, "This is the most marvelous exposition of the mystery of life I've ever seen. This is what life is, something eating itself. I call you face of glory, Kirti Mukha, and you will appear above the door of all my shrines. And you'll see this Kirti Mukha face. You watch for it on Shiva shrines and on many Buddhist shrines, particularly in Southeast Asia and in Indonesia." And what Shiva said was this: "Anyone who will not bow to you and accept you, that is to say, the monstrous nature of life, will be unworthy to come to my shrine." That's a basic religious attitude of absolute yay. Now, in about the 9th and 8th centuries BC, people became a little more sensitive, and there took place what I call the great reversal. Instead of saying yay, there comes the habit of saying nay. And you have a whole series of religions having to do with withdrawing from this horrendous scene. We have many sensitives among us today that can't bear, for example, to eat meat. This is the beginning of the way out. You're saying, no, life should not be that way. You are on the way to saying what Schopenhauer said: life is something that should not have been. So we have two quite different attitudes here, one of affirmation and one of negation. Then, somewhere in the middle of the first millennium BC, a third attitude comes along that is represented first in the religion known as Zoroastrianism. Here you have an idea of two creators, one, the Lord of light and truth, and the other, the Lord of darkness and the lie and deception. And originally, there was a good creation, created by the Lord of light. And when the Lord of darkness beheld this, he became jealous and infected it with negative aspects. And so we have a fall, a perfect creation, a fall. And now there is a struggle between goodness and badness, light and darkness, in which light and goodness is ultimately going to win. But meanwhile, there is a long struggle of restoration. And this is, of course, the tradition that has been inherited through the Bible by Judaism and Christianity, and ultimately also Islam. This is a third point of view. These are three ways of facing this horrendous fact of what life is. Now you can find your own position here, and you'll know at least point one about the mythology that is dominating your life. Is it one of yea to whatever there is? And this doesn't mean that in the context of human life you cannot favor nice guys against unpleasant guys. But you have to be like God, as Christ said, whose sun shines on the wicked and the just, and whose rain falls on the wicked and the just. This you have to be in your love and in your affirmation. Otherwise, no, and pull out. The first function of mythology, then, is this mystical function of relating you to the ultimate mystery, preferably with affirmative, but possibly also with absolute negative nausea. The second function of a traditional mythology is to present what I call a cosmology, an image of the universe through which the sense of this mystical dimension will be communicated, so that everything in the world of your experience, what might be called your psychological environment, will be infected with the realization and proclamation, really, of this dimension of awe and mystery. Now, of course, in our scientific researches, we are not stressing the mystery. We are looking for causal explanations. But this is analysis of the net of wonder that is thrown across us by the field of time and space. Science does not break past the mystery of time and space, whereas the ultimate mystery is exactly beyond that. The third function of a traditional mythology is sociological. It is that of validating and maintaining a sociological order. And typically, this order is regarded as part and parcel of the order of the cosmos. In the biblical tradition, for example, where it is imagined that a specific God said, "Let there be a world," and there was a world, it is also imagined that that same God delivered the law to Moses. In the Hindu tradition, however, where you don't have such a God, you have rather the coming into being of the universe and its disappearance again. It may come through the vehicle of a God, but ultimately it is an impersonal energy that brings forth or sends forth the world and takes it back. You have the notion there that the laws of the Indian society, the caste law, is part and parcel of the universal law, just as the laws of the different animal species determine their modes of life, so the laws of caste determine the laws of man. We have then the mystical function, the cosmological function, the sociological function, and finally, the psychological function, the pedagogical function of carrying the individual through the stages of his life from the attitude of dependency of childhood to responsibility of adulthood, and then out the final door. Now, the present world has removed sections 2 and 3, functions 2 and 3, from the field of mythological concern, really. We turn to the scientist for knowledge of the laws of nature, and these laws of nature are not understood to be fixed laws. What the scientist tells us is simply a working hypothesis that may change from time to time, so that our concept of the cosmos, the concept itself, is in flux. Similarly with our social laws, these are no longer regarded, except in certain quarters, as something delivered from a supernatural authority. These laws are determined by sages in Washington, who sit in council and decide what is prudent and what makes money, let's say, for their particular district. But the laws are humanly designed and are also in flux. Also, the modes of our society are in great change. But everyone still has the problem, which the children in the old Aurignacian caves 30,000 BC had, namely, that the human being is unable to take care of itself for something like 12 solid years, that the human body does not achieve maturity for something like 21 or 2 solid years. And so you are established in your response system, in your reflex system, in the pattern of dependency, looking for protection, looking for authority and approval, and afraid of disapproval. Suddenly then, at puberty or a little later, you are expected to transform yourself into a responsible person whose reflexes will not be looking for advice, but will be, I am the authority here. Now, if you can't make that change, if you can't change your whole reflex system into this other mode, you are what we call a neurotic. A person who is responding with uncertainty and then has to think, oh, gee, I'm 40 years old. I better be the one who does this. Mother's gone long ago. Now, of course, if you're going through for your PhD degree, you won't be able to get out from under that ceiling of authority until you're about 35 or 40. And with that kind of fixation and petrifaction, you may never get over it at all. And I know many and many a scholar who shows his lack of confidence in his own character by supplying simply more footnotes than you can bear to read. Everything he says has to be referred to another authority. Well, there's an advantage in that if you want promotion in the academic world, but it doesn't leave you with the kind of sense of your own powers that we'd like to see in adults. Then after, and now here's this terrible thing about society, it asks you to do a certain thing or a certain range of things, and these do not exhaust your potentials. You have to fit yourself into a slot. You have to suppress a good deal of your own wish system. You have to like it that way. The old societies were able to tempt you in by putting mythological curry on all of the jobs that you did. They gave you caps to wear and things like that, and you loved it, feathers and things. But we don't do that anymore, so it gets to be rather a bore rather quickly. But even if you do like it, there comes a time when just about when you've learned your job, you begin to fumble the ball, or a younger generation has come who's doing it better, or people don't do it that way anymore, so you're on the way out. Now, the next problem in mythology, having introduced people to the world in which they're going to live, is to take them out. There was an old story about Barnum Bailey's circus. They used to have a freak show in a tent. And you'd pay something like 50 cents to go in and see all the freaks. And there'd be signs, to the bearded lady, to the tall man, to the little midgets or whatever. And people would get in. There'd be so many things to see that they would never leave the tent. The tent would fill up. Well, the problem was, how do you get them out? So a brilliant thought occurred to one member of the organization. Take down the exit sign and put up a sign that says, to the grand egress. And then people would go out to see the grand egress, and they'd be out. Now, that's the way the religions work it. You go out, and there'll be daddy and mama, and the hops are waiting for you, and the wings, and it's going to be kind of great. The main job of the society is to get you out without having a nervous breakdown on their hands, and they really don't care what happens when you're out there. Now, this is one of the main problems of mythological tradition. To carry your childhood into maturity and adulthood, and then when you begin to lose your grip and all your energies go back home into your own psyche, have something down there to make you glad to be there again. And having just retired last May from my own career of teaching, I'm dealing with this problem, I can tell you, in my dear little soul, and I'm not waiting to get out the gate. It's all in here. This is a very important point to remember, that everything that in the religious tradition is postponed to the afterworld is really in you right here and now. All the gods, all the hells, all the heavens, all the purgatories, and all the glory is right in you. That's the sense of that way of interpreting one of Christ's sayings, heaven is within you. The kingdom of heaven is there. So believe that and look for it there. The function of mythology is to show you that it's there and how to get there. I remember overhearing at a wedding ceremony, the clergyman saying to the young couple, live your marriage in such a way that in the future life you will enjoy eternal life. Live this life in such a way that you in the future will enjoy eternal life. And I, being a specialist in mythological language, thought this is an incorrect way to say this. The correct way is to say, live your marriage in such a way that you will experience through it and in it eternal life. Because there is this eternal life that has been the life of man, and its transpersonal qualities are what are given to you, shown to you through the myth. So as you go through these standard experiences of life, know this is the experience that man has been experiencing, and it's not my experience only, it's the experience of the world. So much then for this preliminary view. We have the four great main functions of mythology. The mystical, opening up the prospect of awe behind all occurrence in the universe. The cosmological, giving you a great image of the world through which that experience will be rendered. The sociological, putting you sociologically in touch with that so that the society is in accord with the natural order. And finally, the psychological, carrying you into decent relationship to your society and through that to the universe and yourself and to your passage of the great door to eternity, to the experience of what you have been experiencing, so to say, all through life. Now I want very briefly to review the main orders of mythology, and we'll see where our own system stands in relation to the others of mankind. The two great divisions are between societies that are literate societies with writing and highly developed mathematics, such as we have on our watches, and observation and relationship of time to the passage of the seasons and so forth in a perfectly mathematical way. These literate societies come into being in the Near East, in Mesopotamia, in the middle of the 4th millennium BC, about 3500 BC. Before that, there is no literacy anywhere. There's no writing, there's no recording, there's no remembering precisely what happened years and years ago. The other kind of society and mythology related to it is of the non-literate societies with very short memories. Grandfather's time is the mythological time of the past. And the horizon is a very tiny horizon, a small little social group. Every member, every adult in that society is in control of the whole cultural heritage. You don't have a differentiated population. You have little clusters of people pretty much the same. There's authority that goes to the person of considerable skill. There's authority that goes to the old. And there's the authority that goes to people who have mystical experiences, the so-called shamans. But otherwise, everybody is about equal. Now, these non-literate societies themselves fall into two great orders. One is the order of the northern people on the great animal plains, like these plains out here, where you see the whole dome of the sky and the ring of the horizon. And the food supply is primarily animal food. And this food is procured by the men. And it makes a difference whether a man is a good hunter or not. Consequently, the social customs flatter masculine ego, masculine prestige, the good hunter, the one who can do it. Also, and in this kind of civilization or culture, the female is in the role much more of a drudge, actually. All of the food and the authority comes from the male. Now the food is procured by killing. Killing, killing, killing. And the psyche has to protect itself against this. People are living in a sea of blood. The protection is in the form of a mythic idea, namely, there is no such thing as death. What you do is simply take the body away and return the life power to the land, the Mother Earth, the mother from whose bosom the animal world has come. Now there's a wonderful little Blackfoot Indian story that illustrates this, and it's a quite typical story for a hunting culture. It tells of a time when the animals, the buffalo, would not go over the Buffalo Fall. You know, the story is the Indians used to drive the buffalo over a cliff, and then when the herd would fall down there, they'd be easy to slaughter, and they would get the food for the winter in that manner. Well, in this particular year, the buffalo would not go over the fall. So the danger for this particular people was that they would starve to death. Well, a young woman comes out of her teepee one early morning to draw the water for her family, and she looks up on the cliff, and there are all the buffalo right up there. And in a moment, you know how young women are. Oh, if you would only come over, I'd marry one of you. And what do you know? Over they came. A whole buffalo fall, you might say, of beasts coming down. And she was quite delighted by all this until one big bucko comes and says, "Okay, girlie, off we go." "Oh, no," she said. "Oh, yes," he said. "Look what's happened here. You made your promise. We accepted it. And now, no fooling." And he takes her by the arm, and off we go. Because you don't know how buffaloes can take a person by the arm, but that's the way it goes in these stories. They are half animal and half human. You don't quite know what you're looking at. So off they go. Well, the family wakes up, and where's Minnehaha? Well, you know how Indians are. They can trail things on the ground, follow tracks. Daddy says, "She's gone off with a buffalo." And he gets his walking shoes, and he gets his bow and arrow, and he goes off to get Minnehaha back from that buffalo. After he's gone a couple of miles, he comes to a buffalo wallow where the buffalo like to roll around, and there's some water there for them to drink and so forth. And he decides to sit down and wait a bit and think it out. And while he's sitting there, a beautiful magpie comes along. Now, this is a kind of shaman bird. The magpie is a very clever, smart bird, and he has a little more wit in him than most birds. And the man says, when the bird comes down picking around, he says, "Oh, beautiful bird, have you seen my daughter around here? She ran off with a buffalo." "Well," says the magpie, "there's a girl over there with the buffalo now." "Well, will you tell her her father's here at the wallow?" "Okay." So the bird flies over. There's the girl sitting, you know, doing porcupine quill weaving or something like this. And here's her old buffalo husband sleeping behind her, and a lot of other buffalo around about. And the magpie starts picking around. He comes close to her, and he says, "Your father's over at the wallow." "Oh," she says, "this is very dangerous, these buffalo." "You tell him I'll be there presently. I'll be there." Well, shortly the buffalo wakes up, and he takes off one of his horns, and he says, "Go get me some water." And so she goes with the horn to get some water, and Daddy grabs her by the arm and says, "You come along with me now. I don't want you with these buffaloes." And she says, "Well, there's no good running away. They'll catch up to us, and we'll be trampled to death. I'll go back. When they go to sleep again, I'll sneak away." So she goes back to her buffalo with the horn, and he takes one sniff, and he says, "Fee, fi, fo, fum, I smell the blood of an Indian." And she says, "Nothing of the kind." He says, "Absolutely of the kind." He gives a roar, and all the other buffaloes get up, and they do a kind of buffalo dance, and then they go over to that wallow, and they trample that poor Indian to death. Not only to death, but to invisibility. They just grind him right into the ground. Well, the girl's crying. She's desperate. And the buffalo says, So you're crying. You've lost your father. But look at us. We've lost parents, grandchildren, grandparents, everything, so you could eat us. Well, she goes on crying, and he's a compassionate sort of buffalo. And he said, well, if you could bring him back to life, I'll let the Perrier go. So she says to the magpie, will you pick around a little bit, see if you can find a bit of daddy anywhere? And the magpie comes up with a little vertebra. And now here's the great miracle. She puts that vertebra on the ground, and she puts her blanket over it, and she starts to sing a magical song. And presently it's evident that there's a man under there, and she lifts it up. It's daddy all right, but he isn't breathing yet. And she sings a little more, and presently he gets up. The buffalo are astounded. And they say, why don't you do this for us? Here, we'll teach you our dance. You take this dance home. You return our blood to the soil, and we'll come back as willing victims. Now, this idea of a covenant between the animal community and the human community, with the understanding that the animals will give of themselves as willing victims, provided the human community will return the blood so they can come back again next year. This is a basic motif, and you'll find it throughout the world among hunting people. Its counterpart, this notion of a parallel. Perhaps some of you will recognize some of the kosher laws of the Jewish people represented here. The animal meat has to be killed by bleeding before there's a slaughter. Now, when you move to the tropical zones, the zones of the equatorial belt, you have a totally different world. You have a world of jungle. No great dome of the sky, but a leafage above full of twittering angelic birds. And beneath, heavy foliage, and beneath that, poisonous serpents and crocodiles and all kinds of dangerous things. And there's a kind of infinitude of distance, not a ring around the horizon. And the principal food supply is vegetable food. And as the earth gives forth food, so women are the bearers and nourishers of children. And the notion is this, that the woman is the personification of the same power that is that of the earth. So the principal magic is woman magic, not male magic. Another point is that out of the rot of dying and dead vegetation, fresh life comes. And so the notion is born that out of death comes life. And if you want to increase life, increase death. And there is a regular rage of sacrifice throughout that whole domain. Thousands and thousands of beings sacrificed every year from West Africa, across India, Southeast Asia, the Polynesian world, into Middle America, in order to increase the movement of life. Now, the principal myth in zones, besides, anybody can pick a banana, so there's no particular prestige in a good banana picker. And the male psyche is not in very good case in these cultures. This is the place where the male retaliated on the female magic and power by inventing that wonderful institution, the Men's Secret Society, where no women are allowed, and where all kinds of mystical rites are performed of the greatest spiritual value. Well, the typical myth of this world, this plant world, is of a time when there was no time, kind of Garden of Eden time, when men and animals were, as it were, one, when male and female had not been distinguished from each other, when there was no birth and death, but just a timeless time. And this timeless time ended when a murder was committed, when one of these beings was killed. The body was cut up, its portions buried, and the food that men and women eat grew from those parts of the body. Read Longfellow's Hiawatha, the little chapter about the origin of maize, of corn. It's exactly a variant of that myth. You find it everywhere where you have planting cultures. Not only did the food plants come from the death of a person, so that when you're eating food, you are eating a deity, but the sexes were separated at that time, male and female, and begetting was instituted to balance the death. Death came into the world, Birth came into the world, separation of sexes, and the passage of time and the eating, that awful, horrendous thing. Now, the character of a ritual in that culture is to reenact what might be called the mythological deed of the killing and eating. And in a really fabulous book on the Marindanim of Western New Guinea by a Swiss anthropologist named Wirtz, W-I-R-Z, the Marindanim of Western New Guinea, Paul Wirtz, the ritual is described in which this mystery of the beginning of time, which is exactly the counterpart of Cain and Abel and Adam and Eve, is described. The initiation of the young boys has just been completed. These youngsters that are being initiated into manhood by having their teeth filed and scarifications and all of this kind of thing. And then in the last 3 days, there is a general sexual license in which the boys do not participate. When, to use James Joyce's language, every biddy is with everybody's else. The final night, the drums surrounding the dance ground are booming. These are great log drums with slits, and those are the voices of the ancestors. And a girl dressed as one of these early beings with a great pandanus fringe around her. I've seen pictures of these. They're fantastic. She comes into this dance ground and lies down beneath a great lean-to made out of very heavy logs that is supported by 2 uprights. And then the young boys who have just been initiated come, and in series they have sexual intercourse with her. And when the last boy is with her, and in full embrace, the props are removed and the logs come down. Death and begetting together, male and female reunited. They are drawn out, roasted, and eaten. You have the communion meal there of the refreshment of the world through the reenactment of that mystery act by which the world was originally pitched down the corridor of time. Now, the coming into being of the agricultural civilizations of the Near East is inspired from this equatorial zone. And this myth that I've just told you is the myth that underlies even the biblical story of the fall in the garden and the coming of sex and the coming of death with the Cain and Abel story right after that, and the great tree. And on this tree, years and years later, that fruit of the tree, the Redeemer Christ, whose flesh is meat indeed and whose blood is drink indeed, is hanging. This is a continuous mythology which is to introduce us to the mystery of the pouring of divinity into the world of our lives. This is why we say grace before meals. God has given his own substance, only we read it as though it were a gift given. It's the God substance itself that comes through. There's a wonderful Hindu grace before meals that is recited in the monasteries of India. The Indian word for the ultimate mystery is Brahman. Brahman is the sacrifice. Brahman is the eater of the sacrifice. Brahman is the fire of the sacrifice. Brahman is the spoon of the sacrifice. He who sees Brahman in all action is on the way to realizing Brahman in himself. There's a religious mood here, even through the horror of it all. Well, now I move from that primitive zone into the realm of the high cultures of the literate societies. And these I divide into 2 orders, those east of Persia and those west of Persia. Eastward of Persia, if you take the line 60 degrees east of Greenwich as your dividing line, eastward of Persia there are 2 creative high culture centers, and they are India and China. All of the civilizations of Southeast Asia and North Asia are really inspired from those 2 centers. Look at them on a map. India is separate from the rest of the world. North of it is the great Himalayan range, the Himalayas. and around it are the oceans. It is set apart. It is isolated. China also has the great deserts to the west. It is set apart. It is isolated. New influences could come in never in great mass, but only with small impacts which could be absorbed, so that these are extremely traditional conservative cultures. In their mythologies and philosophies to this day, we have a continuation of the philosophies and mythologies that were present at the time that the high cultures entered those areas. And that time was, for India, 2500 BC, with the so-called Indus Valley civilization. For China, 1500 BC, with the Shang dynasty. That is the period of the Bronze Age. And the principal mythology of the Bronze Age is this, that there is a continuous coming into being and going out of being of the universe, moved by an impersonal power to which you cannot pray. The gods are simply agents of that great impersonal power. This is the Chinese Tao. This is the Indian Rita, the rhythm or way of the universal impersonal coming and going. Westward of that line, there are two great creative centers. One is the Near East, which includes Egypt, and the other is Europe. Now, these are very close together, and they have been influencing each other powerfully throughout the centuries. Furthermore, the high culture forms which originated in the Near East about 3500 BC, went eastward to India and China, went also westward into Europe. And they form a kind of middle band there. In the European zone and the Western zone, they're wide open to invasions from north and south, from hunting people, from herding people, from warrior people. Now, these early planters were peaceful people. There's no doubt about it. But the people of the deserts and of the grazing plains of the north saw that there was wealth there and came raiding in. These raids begin in force about 2500 BC, and the raiding people are of two great racial groups. Those from the north are the Aryans. Those from the south are the Semites. The Semites come in, pardon me, from the Syro-Arabian desert, and the Aryans from the Central and East European grazing plains. The Aryans invented the war chariot drawn by horses, which was an almost invincible weapon. And the Semites invented or mastered the camel, the riding camel, and they also had powerful attacks. And they raided in on these more peaceful areas and became the dominant races. Their deities were masculine deities, killers, thunderbolt hurlers. Think of Zeus, think of Yahweh, think of Indra. The main deity of the earlier tradition was the female mother, the earth and the whole cosmos, who bring forth the world and its forms. There's a great conflict and antagonism between these two systems. But the earlier one, pardon me, the more sophisticated one, was that of the planting people. Now we come to a very interesting thing, and it's relevant to our problem. The mythology of the hunting, raiding people who moved in is taken from the earlier, highly sophisticated planting civilizations. We know this. You can read the Sumerian myths, and you see them in the Bible. In the earlier traditions, they were referring to the mother. In the later traditions, the father takes over the mother's role. It's a very amusing thing. Did you ever hear of a man giving birth to a woman? Adam gave birth to Eve. It was the other way around originally. Also, you can ask yourself, who wants Abraham's bosom? The whole mythology that we have inherited, oh, thank you, is basically referring to the mother. But it is delivered to us by our masculine clergy as referring to the father. That's why the psychoanalysts make so much money. Because the mythology talks directly to your psyche. And when your brain is told, oh, it means just the opposite, you are in a fix. Now, to discuss very briefly the two great worlds of modern religion that have come. One from these Near Eastern mythologies of the Semitic people, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And on the other hand, the great mythologies of the Mother Goddess, which have survived in the Eastern zones. I want to begin with a short description of the main points of the Eastern, and then turn to the Western traditions, which are ours, and then finish up this little affair. The main idea in the Oriental religions is that the ultimate truth, the ultimate mystery, the ultimate wonder of the world is absolutely beyond imaging, beyond naming, beyond descriptions, beyond all categories of thought. To ask as we do, is God merciful, just, loving, forgiving? This is to apply human sentiments to something that lies even beyond human conception. This is a form of anthropomorphism. You can't even say whether it is one or many, because those are concepts. You can't even say whether it is or is not, because these are concepts. It absolutely transcends all conceptualization. But the mystery is this. That which is the mystery beyond conceptualization is the mystery of your own existence. It is transcendent of concepts, yet immanent in all experience and all being. As early as the 8th century, in the Chandogya Upanishad, the formula is given, Tat Tvam Asi, you are it. But not the you that you have conceptualized. Not the you that you can see is different from that other you over there. Not this little you in time and space, which is a flicker of that which is the mystery of all being. And so you have this oxymoron, this self-contradictory statement. You are not, you are it. Anything that you know about yourself or about anything is not it. You are to identify yourself with the witness. I know my body. I am not my body, I am the witness of my body. I know my feelings. I am not my feelings, I am the witness of my feelings. I know my thoughts. I am not my thoughts, I'm the witness of my thoughts. You can drive yourself out the back of the wall that way, and then the Buddha comes along and he says, there's no witness either. And with that, you begin to get it. The aim of all traditions of the East is to bring about within you an experience of your identity with that which is the all. And one who has awakened to that is said to be the wake one. And that's what the word Buddha means, the one who has waked up. And nirvana means simply that you have quenched within yourself the identification of yourself with that little conceptualized entity whose life you cherish here in the normal way of daylight living. Now compare with this the situation in our world. God has created the world. The creator and the creature are not identical. Anyone who says I and the Father are one has committed blasphemy, and Jesus was crucified for saying that. That was blasphemy, and the punishment for blasphemy was death. 900 years later, the Sufi mystic Hallaj said the same thing, and he too was crucified for that. Now he challenged his crucifixion, and maybe that Christ did too. Hallaj tells a wonderful story. He gives a wonderful image about the aim of the mystic. The aim of the mystic is to realize his identity with that which is his beloved. He compares it to a moth that at night sees a light in a candle, or in a lantern. And he flies and batters his wings all night trying to get to that candle. And then in the morning goes back to his friends and he says, this wonderful thing I saw last night. And They look at him and they say, you don't look the better for it. That's the condition of the ascetic. But then he goes back the next night, and he manages to insinuate himself through the glass, and he does indeed become that light himself, one with the flame. That's the aim of the mystic. And the orthodox person who crucifies the mystic because he says this is actually helping him to achieve his aim, to become united with that one while he is in the ecstasy of his mystic realization. And so we have these two totally different traditions. Now let's see. The aim of the Eastern tradition is to experience your identity with the divine. That is not permitted to us in our Orthodox religions. We have plenty of mystics who have uttered this truth, let's say, and have come off badly for it in the world. Well, what is the aim of our religion? To achieve a relationship to God. This is a totally different religious aim. You have A is related to X. You are related to the divine. How? Through a specific social institution. Not through cognizing the mystery of the universe, but through the grace of a specific social institution. For example, in Judaism, God, Yahweh, has a covenant with a certain people, no one else. Completely exclusive. In the traditional biblical view, no one else in the world knows God but the Jews. How do you become a member of this community? By birth from a Jewish mother. Now, you can't be more exclusive than that. What about the Christian community? Jesus is true God and true man. In the Orient, everyone is to realize that about himself.